Hello, so I want to talk to you about paper, and what I've done is I've gone through all of my drawers and I've picked up all of the watercolour paper. So I've got lots of different pads. Part of the reason I've got lots of different pads is because I buy a paper, I try a paper and see if I like it, and sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't like it. I also have different styles of pads for different jobs, and I will talk about that a little bit more. And I have different sizes. There's an awful lot to watercolour paper if you want to know it all, and I think some of it is useful and some of it is detail that can be useful, but you don't necessarily need it straight off. One of the first things you need to know is that watercolour paper has what's called sizing on the top surface of the paper, and what that does is it allows the water to penetrate the paper and the pigment to kind of remain on the surface, and that's one of the things that helps to give the kind of translucency of watercolour, so it's not just sinking into the paper. One of the things you can find if the sizing is either too much or isn't distributed evenly is when you put your paint on, you get like little watery spots and resisty areas that can look a bit odd. I often find that when I'm making my own handmade journals, I'm working on the back of the paper and that doesn't have sizing, so the paper behaves a little bit differently. The second thing to know about watercolour paper is that it has a weight. And if you look here, you can see that on this pad that I've got, which is the first one, it's got 300 grams per metre squared, or GSM, or 140 pounds. Now that's kind of the weight, what's called the weight of the paper. Anything that is probably under about 250 or 200 GSM, you would need to go through the process of taping and stretching, which involves wetting the paper and allow it to dry. I don't like to have to do that. It's quite time consuming, and I would much rather buy a heavier weight paper that I can just paint straight away on. If you want to find more about that process, there are lots of YouTube videos, and I will definitely include a link to an art shop that I like that has some really good information. So we've obviously got our brand here. We've got the weight. This is kind of not quite UK A4 size, but nearly, and you've got the size here. And this is something that's called hot pressed, which is the other piece of information that you can get on your watercolour pad. Hot pressed basically means that the surface of the paper is going to be really, really smooth. There will be no lumps and bumps. It's great for detailed work. Lots of botanical artists use it. And the name hot pressed comes from the way the paper is made. So those are the kind of bits of information that you're going to find on the front. You're going to find the kind of type that refers to the texture and the weight, and those will be the most important things. Now, one of the reasons I have this particular pad, and I'm just going to see if I'm able to show you this, the edges are all glued, and there is a small gap, and I always forget where it is on this particular pad, because there's kind of an area that's not glued, where when you've finished your painting, you slide a palette knife under and you detach that one piece. This is what's called a block, a watercolour block, and it means that rather than having pages that you might tear out or leaf through, there's a block of paper that is glued at the edges, at least 3 of them, normally 4 edges, and there's a gap either in the middle, as it is here, or at a corner, so that when the painting's finished you can take it off. What that kind of does for you is something similar to the stretching and taping of a piece of paper to a board. It stops it from cockling and bending and doing all those kind of things, and keeps it flat, so as it gets wet it's held in place by the glue. So I have a few blocks that are like that. Again, you can see here, this is a different version of the same brand, so I'm trying out some different kind of things. Now on here you've got the same, you've got the weight, the 300 or the 140 pounds. You've got that it's hot pressed, so it's smooth. Also on this one, you've got some extra information that is true of most good brands. That is the idea that it's acid free, And that just means that it's not going to really deteriorate with age, and it's not going to yellow, which is important. Again, this one's a block, but a smaller block, and it's got a little bit at the corner so I can take up a sheet at a time. This is a UK Art Shop's own brand of paper. It comes in a few sizes. I tend to have A4, which is this size, and A3. Again, it's 300 GSM or £140. This is what's called cold pressed or not. And what it's got is a little bit of a texture. And you can up close see a right and a wrong side to it. It's very difficult for that to show up on the camera. But when you have them in front of you, you can see that there's a side that has a little bit more texture, and that will be the side that you should paint on that has the sizing. Now, this is an actual pad. It's just glued or gummed on one edge. This is often what I use for lots of my day-to-day mindful watercolours and things like that, because it works out fairly cheaply to buy these and turn them into journals. Same brand, but this is hot press or smooth. And you can see, well, I can see, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, this is totally smooth. This is Canson, and it is 9 and a bit inches by 12.5 inches. It's cold pressed again, and it has a nice texture to it. I'm quite liking this. Again, it's 300 GSM or £140. When you go onto the back of this one, it can give you a little bit of extra information sometimes. This one tells me that it's 100% cellulose. You can use it for things other than watercolour. It tells me that it's sized, which means it's got that coating on. Now, this one is a much more expensive brand of paper. This is Arches, and I love to paint on this, but I cannot afford to paint on it all of the time. It is a lot more expensive, and one of the reasons it's a lot more expensive is that it's 100% cotton. So it doesn't have any wood or wood pulp or anything like that in there. It is all cotton. Now, that means it is the kind of sturdiest of the watercolour paper. The more cotton that's in there, the longer the fibres are that are in the paper. And so when you come to use wet in wet, or you want to lift or things like that, the paper can cope with that really, really well. Again though, this is 300 GSM. You can get it so it goes up to 600, which I think is 200. Well, I would think it was £280, but my brain has got £240. But it's a much, much thicker paper. Again, this version is hot pressed. Arches comes in all the different kinds of textures: hot press, cold pressed or not. It's got a little bit of texture and then rough. This is a pad and not a block. I'll come back to those two in a second. This is Aquarello. Now, I haven't really tried this yet. It's another brand that is 100% cotton, and the reason I have this to try, and I got it in the smallest size, well, it was on a deal, was because it's extra white. Now, if I put that next to the Arches, you can kind of see, and you can definitely see for me, a real difference in how creamy this is compared to this small pad. So this is another one to try. Again, it's 300 GSM, it's acid free. And this one again is a block, and it's got a little gap just here, so you can separate those off. And the next two pads that I've got lurking around actually are Bockingford, which are British makes. And I've got two sorts here. I've got this one and this one. So this is not, and this is hot press. Again, it's very, very smooth because it's hot press. These are what's called mould made, and you get different kinds of ways of making the paper. Handmade paper, which tends to be like 100% cotton, and it's like really sturdy and it's quite expensive. Mould made, which is made. It's basically made. The pulp is put into a big mould, and then you've got machine made, and the machine made is kind of the least sturdy of them all, I suppose. But it does produce consistent paper. It's probably the least favourite among professional artists, the machine made, and then there would be the mould made, and then there's the handmade. But really, until you try them out and see what you like, you don't know. And then this one is just a bigger version of Cass Art. So I'm really lucky to have all these papers, but I haven't bought them all at once. I've built up like a little collection over time, and the ones that I really like in there, ones that I'm not so sure about. What I don't have a lot of in my collection is what's called rough. Now this is a handmade piece of paper that's kind of approaching rough, but rough paper is very, very textured. And if you want to then do pen work on the top, you've obviously got lots of lumps and bumps that pens can jar over. So that can be a little bit tricky. One of the things I did do is I looked on some of the websites that I use to buy art supplies, and I checked out if they had got sample packs. Sometimes they do free sample packs, or they'll do a sample pack that is like £1 or £2 to add on to your order. And you can get different ones. Now this is one of those sample packs, or what's left of it. I think there's only probably this one piece in here, and it tells you kind of what the paper is, and you get a little area that you can try out. You can buy sample packs that have got like 10 and 15 different papers in, and I really think actually when you're starting out it's a really good idea to maybe get one of those and see which ones you like in there. You probably won't get all of the papers that you want to try in one pack, but you'll get a good idea of, do I prefer knot or cold press? Do I like the hot press and the really smooth finish? Do I really prefer the ones that have got cotton in? And you'll be able to balance out what you really like against what's an affordable paper to find a good paper that you can practice on that's not too different from what you might use if you can afford to buy the one that you really, really love. So I definitely suggest doing that. And that is basically all there is to know about watercolour paper in terms of mindful watercolours. I would suggest that using either cold pressed or hot pressed, so either smooth or a little bit of texture, is a good way to go, and that you stick with 300 GSM or £140. If you find a bargain of something that has 100% cotton, go with that, or anything that has some cotton in it is really good. But whatever you can afford that has that 300 GSM weight is going to be the one that's going to work well for you. When it gets lighter than that, then that becomes a problem with buckling.